Having previously made a video on the state parks of the capital Saratoga region, this episode will be about the central region of New York State parks on the occasion of its centennial in the year 2024, when the New York State Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historical Preservation marks this historic milestone. The central region is comprised of the Oswego, Oneida, Onondaga, Madison, Herkimer, Otsego, Shenango, Cortland, Broome, and Delaware counties, stretching from the edges of the Adirondack and Catskill Mountains, parts of the Mohawk Valley, edges of the Finger Lakes, and the shore of Lake Ontario. It contains the cities of Syracuse, Utica, and Binghamton, and a large portion of the historic homeland of the Iroquoian Haudenosaunee, the Iroquois Confederacy that comprised of the nations of Seneca, Cayuga, Onondaga, Oneida, and the Mohawks, known as the Gateway on the west-eastern side. The capital circled here on this map is Albany, which moved to that location in 1797, replacing New York City as the seat of state government, seen as a more central location. But as the state expanded west, it made sense to describe this region as the state center. But before I go into the parks of the central region, I have to make an important correction. When I did the video on Long Island State Parks earlier, I forgot to mention the Walt Whitman Birthplace State Historic Site. It was built in 1819 by Walt Whitman's father, and this newly restored farmhouse is a New York State Historic Site listed on the National Register of Historic Places. It houses a 19th century furniture, schoolmaster's desk, and displays relating to the life of this famous poet and writer. The Whitman family moved to Brooklyn in 1823 when Walt Whitman was just a little boy, and his father sold the property to the Carlton Jarvis and his descendants. It exchanged ownership several times, and eventually the Huntington Historical Society spearheaded local interest in protecting the property. Attracted to its historical associations, John and Georgia Watson purchased the home and lived there for over 30 years in the beginning of the 20th century. In 1940s, there were plans made to purchase the house and turn it into a historical site. October 1951, the newly chartered Walt Whitman Birthplace Association acquired the house and its grounds. And in April 1957, Governor Averell Harriman signed the bill to assume state ownership, and in 1957 became New York State's 22nd state historical site, nestled between tract suburban housing and strip malls and parking lots, this little piece of greenery and history on Long Island. And on that note, when it comes to bearded writers of the 19th century, going into the central region, there's the John Burroughs Memorial State Historic Site, a 25-acre property that includes the Woodchuck Lodge in Roxbury, built by John's brother in 1862, 15 years after John was born, on the east end of the Burroughs family farm. The Burroughs homestead is where both of the boys grew up, and a mile up the road was built where John was 13 years of age. It was his retreat in retirement. John Burroughs' grave is a stroll up the road from Woodchuck Lodge in a place called Boyhood Rock. He wrote 27 books about nature, philosophical essays that influenced millions of readers. And he was born here in April of 1837. Teddy Roosevelt, the great conservationist president, wrote of Burroughs that it's a good thing for our people that you should have lived. In 1899, he served as historian on the Harriman expedition, exploring the coast of Alaska with conservationist John Muir, artist Louis Agassiz, and photographer Edward Curtis, along with a group of scientists. John Burroughs died in 1921. In the 1970s, John Lutz, a great-grandnephew of John Burroughs, purchased this place from E. Wilson Burroughs. John and his wife Una soon founded the Woodchuck Lodge, Inc., with the mission of promoting Burroughs' legacy, donating it to the state in 1973. State Park at the Fair is the smallest state park in New York. It was established in 1974 on the grounds of the New York State Fair to mark the occasion of the 50th anniversary of the New York State Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historical Preservation. It is open only at the end of August during the New York State Fair, operating through Labor Day. This 1-acre park includes a constructed pond with picnic tables around it, 2 pavilion buildings, and a mini golf course. This is State Park at the Fair at just 1 acre. Chittenango Falls State Park, a picturesque 167-foot waterfall. Its name is Oneida for where the waters run north. The park is 195 acres, acquired by the state in 1922. Helen Lincoln Fairchild saved the falls in 1887 from being developed by creating the Chitenango Falls Park Association. It is home to a rare animal, critically endangered Chitenango ovate amber snail, identified as recently as 1905, and that snail lives next to the waterfall. This creek, Chitenango Creek, marks the boundary between the Oneida and Onondaga people. Next state park on the list is Helen McNitt State Park at 134 acres, acquired by the state in 1999, facing Cazenovia Lake, one of the smallest of the Finger Lakes. The lake was donated. The land along the lake was donated to the state by the McNitt family. Hiking, parking, and a canoe launch are in this park. Its namesake Helen was an ardent bird watcher and loved wildlife. She died in 2013. But don't say bird watcher. I know a lot of the people in that community like to describe what they do as birding. So just a warning on that. Lorenzo State Historic Site is on the southern side of Cazenovia Lake. Built around 1807, the federal-style home of John Lincoln, an agent for the Holland Land Company that developed properties throughout Western New York, Dutch investors that gave the name Holland Land Company. And he was the founder of the town of Cazenovia. His wife was Helen Ledyard, who came from a family of Revolutionary War veterans. Lorenzo was continually occupied by the Lincoln and Ledyard family until the property and the contents were given to New York State in 1968. Inside, you could see the past residents and workers on this property, including slaves, servants, and the many employees who worked here. Special events throughout the year relating to sleighing on a horse, antique car shows, the views of Cazenovia Lake. The lake and the town were named for fellow Holland land investor Theophilus Cazenove of the Netherlands, descendant of French Huguenots. Clark Reservation State Park, 378 acres, acquired by the state in 1926. Mary Clark Thompson bought this property in 1915. She learned that the fossil waterfall, the former waterfall that created the lake, in the glacier lake in the middle of the park, was considered for a limestone quarry, knowing that nearby lands were being used as quarries. She acquired this tract and gave it to the New York State Museum with a stipulation the land be preserved as a memorial to her father, Myron Clark, who was governor of New York State for just a brief year, 1855 to 1856, but she made sure that his name is remembered. The Glacier Lake is a glacial plunge basin lake on which the surface waters and the bottom waters do not mix. Habitat of a rare plant, the American hart's tongue fern. The limestone shelf leading to the precipice at Clark Reservation is an example of a karst topography created by a dissolution of limestone and related rocks. Among its features, a deep depression in the limestone known as Dry Lake. Looks like a big kettle landscape, but without the water. Dry Lake is not located next to the actual Glacier Lake. Has a visitors and nature center inside, and you can see these fissures along the surface of Clark Reservation State Park. Green Lake State Park, 1,957 acres, acquired by the state in 1928. Green Lake and Round Lake have an unusual blue-green color. It's certainly one of the most popular swimming beaches in central New York. Adjacent to the beach is a boathouse, rowboat, paddleboat rentals, 18-hole golf course designed by Robert Trent Jones, as well as a clubhouse at its southeastern quadrant. Above the western cliffs along Green Lake is the Frisbee Golf Course, a sport called Frisbee Golf, and 137 campsites and 7 cabins. Betsy Knapp, a descendant of the family that acquired and farmed this area in the early 19th century, noticed the particular role of Harry Francis, a professor at New York State College of Forestry at Syracuse University. And during the Great Depression, the Civilian Conservation Corps hauled loads of sand from nearby Oneida Lake to create a sandy beach on Green Lake. The park housed wartime farm workers from Newfoundland, and towards the end of World War II, German prisoners of war were also housed at this park. Nearly half the water that enters the lakes comes directly from the bedrock in which the lakes are embedded. The water contains a heavy load of dissolved minerals that are not present in the water that enters in the surface. High concentration of sulfur in the deep waters that were reported in 1849. The lake's waters have a high concentration of calcium and magnesium, and they are known as meromictic lakes. Meromictic lakes have this layers of mixed water, unmixed water, and this water on the bottom. This is a Green Lake State Park, a very unusual geologic formation. Verona Beach State Park. I should also notice that Green Lake State Park on its northern border is the old Erie Canal towpath, a linear state park, which we will discuss much later. Now on to Verona Beach State Park, located on the eastern side of Oneida Lake, 1,735 acres, acquired by the state in 1944. It has a beach, bathhouse, concession stand, and a picnic pavilion with picnic shelters, 46 campsites, recreation building. There are 4 miles of nature trails, hiking, and 8 miles of horseback and mountain bike trails, as well as cross-country skiing and snowmobile paths within this park. It's located next to a Sylvan Beach community, and because this faces the long side of Oneida Lake, you can't see the other side of the lake from here, so it feels almost oceanic, or almost like a Great Lake, but fresh water without the waves at Verona Beach State Park, facing Oneida Lake. It's next to the Sylvan Beach community, just to its north, a beach town in the heart of central New York. Oneida Lake also has a former state park called Frenchman's Island, which has an abandoned lighthouse and abandoned dock that were a place of visits in the 19th century. But in 2011, it was transferred to the Department of Environmental Conservation as a nature preserve. So DEC site, that's a former state park, Frenchman's Island on Oneida Lake. And again, Verona Beach is on the eastern side of Oneida Lake. Delta Lake State Park near the city of Rome, New York. 720 acres acquired by the state in 1962. It's located near the source of the Mohawk River. Delta Lake is a reservoir formed by the Delta Lake Dam in 1908. Delta Lake serves the Erie Canal downstream in Rome to regulate the water levels between the locks of Erie Canal. Delta Lake State Park has hiking trails, campsites, playground on the beach, and a very nice beach pavilion. As far as Delta Lake is concerned, not exactly triangular. I mean, the peninsula kind of looks that way. But a little bit about its history, there's a lost village of Delta that was demolished to make way for the reservoir. So in a way saying that central New York has its own Atlantis. And you can see here Delta Lake Reservoir near the headwaters of Mohawk River, the second longest river in New York State, and a tributary of the larger Hudson River. Oriskany Battlefield State Historic Site is 70 acres with a monument built in 1883. It was here that General Nicholas Herkimer led a relief column to assist the Patriots at Fort Stanwix, which was besieged by the British, as well as their loyalist and native supporters. Nicholas Herkimer's army was ambushed here in a ravine by Iroquois chief Joseph Brant. About half of Herkimer's force, including the commander, were killed or wounded, as well as 15% of the loyalist force in this almost regarded as a stalemate battle, with each side claiming certain advantages. Herkimer died 10 days after the battle, and this is the Oriskany Battlefield State Historic Site with a very cute little visitors pavilion next to the monument. And inside the park, there are signs, including the clash of cultures between the Iroquois, most of whom had supported the British, with the exception of the Oneida, who supported the Patriots. The ambush that took place here in 1777, the effort to preserve the battlefield, as well as some of the important figures. Besides Herkimer and Brant, there was also Colonel John Butler, who was instrumental in inducing the Senecas to fight on behalf of the British, and Sir John Johnson, the Baron Johnson of New York, the local nobility, also forced to flee to Canada following the defeat in the Revolution. At the time, the area was called Tryon County after colonial governor Tryon, and the name was changed after the Revolution. Steuben Memorial State Historic Site, named after Baron von Steuben, a German nobleman who initially fought with the French and then joined the Patriot cause, known as the drill master of the Revolution. Under the command of Washington, Steuben had trained the Patriot Army to become professional fighters. It was acquired by the state in 1862. This 53-acre site is part of a larger 16,000-acre land grant given to von Steuben after the Revolution by the state as a reward for his effort in the war. His gravesite was moved from the road that was built here later into the heart of this park, and the log cabin where this member of nobility had lived humbly in retirement was reconstructed after the site became a state historic site. Von Steuben never married. He had two younger men who lived with him, two younger officers, and he gave the land to them as an inheritance. Potentially, maybe he was gay and in a relationship, but in those days, those things usually were not known publicly. But as I mentioned, he was never married. So General von Steuben, a hero to the German-American community. Herkimer Home State Historic Site. Likewise, Nicholas Herkimer also had a home in the central region, and this is where he died shortly after the battle. The house was constructed around 1764. The property is today 160 acres, acquired by the state in 1913. He assembled 800 militiamen, supported by 60 Oneida warriors in the Battle of Oriskany. That was fought on August 6, 1777. His family, enslaved people who helped run the estate, soldiers encamped on the property during the war, and neighbors who sought refuge from the fighting in the Mohawk Valley all took place here at the Herkimer State Historic Site. During the 1800s, the property saw a lot of change because of the Erie Canal and the railroad built along its edge. And after 6 different owners, it became a state property. Herkimer is descendant of German settlers from the Palatine region of Germany, coming here around 1710. Nearly 3,000 settlers, including the Herkimer family. And he's buried here as well. Pixley Falls State Park, very cute name, 375 acres, acquired by the state in 1924, located on the edge of the Tug Hill Plateau, the snowiest place in New York State. It's named for a waterfall on Lansing Kiln near the community of Boonville in Oneida County. The pavilions in this park were also built by the Civilian Conservation Corps during the Great Depression. Buck Hill State Forest and Clark Hill State Forest border on this park. So it could be said that it's a continuous expanse of undeveloped state-preserved land. Sandy Island Beach State Park is 227 acres, acquired by the state relatively recently, post-millennial in 2006. In the 1950s, there was a Sandy Island Beach was here as a private resort by the LeGrand and family and Eva Smith. The resort became very popular, but as it went into a decline in the 1970s and then closed in 1991. 1999, Nature Conservancy, in partnership with the county and the state, acquired this unique habitat and sand dunes. The DC and the county land were merged to create this state park. Beachgrass habitat on Lake Ontario and dunes preserved for their unique landscape. Selkirk Shores State Park was 980 acres, acquired in 1925. In 1838, a lighthouse was built here, and land was acquired by the Port Ontario Land Company in anticipation for a port, but it couldn't compete with Oswego, and it remained wild. The Civilian Conservation Corps developed campgrounds here with cabins and a park office in the 1930s. And in 2024, Governor Kathy Hochul announced a redesign for the park that includes a new park entrance and park building. So some new architecture coming soon to Selkirk Shores State Park. Within the park are historical markers talking about the Civilian Conservation Corps and its impact on the park, as well as its unique biodiversity and ecology on the Great Lakes. Mexico Point State Park is 122 acres, previously known as the Mexico Point Club through the 1950s. Lake Ontario, it has a bathhouse, picnic facilities, and nature trails. It's a state park that's maintained by the town of Mexico. The town itself dates back to the 1790s, so making it older than the independent country of Mexico that separated from Spain in the 1820s. Historians do not know for sure why this town is named Mexico. Perhaps the surveyor was thinking of warmer, more exotic places as it was being mapped out. The property was purchased by the state in the early 1960s, located at the mouth of the Little Salmon River that was diverted to the east with breakwaters built and the Mexico Point boat launch established here, managed by the town since 1991. Fort Ontario State Historic Site is just 36 acres, acquired by the state in 1949. The original Fort Ontario was created in 1755 during the French and Indian War, when this was a battleground between the French and the British. And in order to bolster defenses already built across the Oswego River at Fort Oswego on the opposite side of the river's mouth. At the time, its name was the Fort of the Six Nations for the Iroquois nations just to the south. But the fort was destroyed by French forces during the Battle of Fort Oswego in 1756, rebuilt by British in 1759, changed hands a few times during the American Revolution. The British held the fort after the Revolutionary War ended in violation of the Treaty of Paris, handing it over finally in 1796, when the John Jay Treaty went into effect. The fort was attacked again in 1814 when the British forces from Canada tried to recapture New York. But that war ended in a stalemate. The British went back to Canada. The United States kept its independence. After a period of disuse, new construction was undertaken in the 1840s and a renewed period of tension with Great Britain, as well as to check smuggling activities between Canada and the United States. During the American Civil War, new construction on the fort feared that the British might try to help the Confederates. After that, it just became a training ground for the US as relationships with Canada warmed up. In 1944, 982 refugee Jews were sheltered here at Fort Oswego for the War Refugee Board, an example of too little, too late. That in a war that had killed nearly 6 million Jews in Europe, the United States was very reluctant to relax its immigration quotas and to open its borders to refugees. These 982 Jews was just a small token amount in 1944, and they were told to stay at Fort Oswego and return to Europe after the war. But after the horrors of the Holocaust were seen by the world, these refugees were allowed to stay in the US. After the war, Fort Ontario was transferred to the state of New York, briefly housing World War II veterans and their families until 1953 when they found better homes. Within Fort Oswego, there's historical signs talk about the Battle of Oswego, the African-American troops that were stationed here when the army was segregated, so the Harlem Hellfighters, as they were known, and it's part of a trail called the Seaway Trail that follows St. Lawrence River, Lake Ontario, Niagara River, and Lake Erie throughout New York State. Battle Island State Park, 235 acres, acquired by the state in 1938, named after a battle that took place on a nearby island on July 3rd, 1756, during the French and Indian War. A British fleet, returning from delivering supplies to Fort Ontario, ambushed here by a party of French with their native supporters. Although outnumbered, the British and colonial forces repulsed the attacks on this island, which is actually located just to the north of the state park, which is just a peninsula on the Oswego River. And much later, Frederick Emmerich designed a golf course here, nearly 200 acres, given to the state in 1916, and developed as a state park in 1938. 18-hole par 72 golf course designed by Devereux Emmett, a renowned designer of golf courses. Shenango Valley State Park, 1,112 acres, 184 campsites, 24 cabins, contains kettle lakes within the park, and pavilions designed by the Civilian Conservation Corps. Alongside the Shenango State Park, the Shenango River was turned into a canal that connected Erie Canal to the Susquehanna River at Binghamton, and the Shenango Canal operated until 1878 when it was unprofitable and returned back to nature. Alongside one of the lakes, the Shenango Lake within State Park is a nice water slide. So it resembles a little bit of a lake, a little bit of a pool. And the name Shenango is believed to have come from the native term land of the bull thistle. So inside the park, there are signs about the history of the Shenango Canal. It was part of a larger system of canals called the New York State Canal System. It includes also Champlain Canal, Delaware and Hudson Canal, Oswego Canal, and a few others. Lock 107 is within the park. Today, just a small stone remnant on an embankment between the park and the Shenango River at Shenango Valley State Park. Aquaga Creek State Park, 1,385 acres and 90 campsites, one full-service cottage, and several rustic cabins. 55-acre Arctic Lake is inside this park, has a beach. Not sure how it got the name Arctic Lake, perhaps a little bit cold. Maybe it's used for ice fishing when the winter weather allows. A 9-hole disc golf course is in here, and Aquaga Creek got its name from the Mohawk for a place of wild grapes. The Handbook of American Indians gives over 50 spelling variations to the name Aquaga, such as Anaquago, Aquaga, Skagwaki. The village of Aquaga to the west of this park was destroyed in October 1778 by troops led by Colonel William Butler and Colonel Philip Van Cortlandt, as they cleansed out much of the southern tier from loyalist natives. And later the land was given to veterans of the Revolution. Aquaga State Park borders on the Arctic China State Forest, another exotic name. I'm not sure how it was given to this area. What I love about the Aquaga State Park is some of the cabins that have very unusual architecture. It's almost like a boat turned sideways and everything wooden inside, and a historic-looking stove. Aquaga State Park. Robert V. Riddell State Park, 2,163 acres, given to the state in 2005, a gift of Patricia Riddell Kent in memory of her father. Her family has owned this land since 1871, used as a farm. It consists of agricultural fields that are unused, deciduous and coniferous forests, Chenevis Creek, a popular trout stream on the northern parcel of the park, with some waterfalls inside, and Mud Lake, a spring-fed pond with floating moss and peat deposits. I thought about this. Perhaps it would have been better as a farm, but I guess it's better than being developed. So given back to nature. This is the Robert V. Riddell State Park, and you can see a picture of Patricia Riddell Kent and her husband giving the land to the state, with Governor George Pataki presiding. George Pataki is known as an environmentalist Republican, matched perhaps closest by former New Jersey Governor Christy Todd Whitman, who also held office in the 90s. Yes, Republicans who were conservationist. Going in the legacy of Teddy Roosevelt, this was George Pataki. Next state park is Hunts Pond State Forest, a former state park that was transferred to the DEC in 2011 as part of Hunts Pond State Forest. When it was a state park, it was never developed. So even today, Hunts Pond State Forest, which is again not a state park but a state forest, is a place for hiking and enjoying nature. Next one is Gilbert Lake State Park. Gilbert Lake State Park is 1,584 acres, acquired by the state in 1926. The acquisition of land for Gilbert Lake State Park sits upon land previously used for timber production. It was given to state in 1926, and development soon followed with the Civilian Conservation Corps, which had a camp here from 1933 to 1941. The CCC undertook various improvement tasks, cabins, dams, wildlife refuge, erosion control, and roads and trails within the park. It's home to a New York State Civilian Conservation Corps Museum that talks about their efforts. Just like the Army, the CCC was segregated between units for African Americans and for whites, as it was the case in the 1930s. Glimmerglass State Park and the Hyde Hall State Historic Site, 593 acres acquired by the state in 1963 on Otsego Lake. And in its name, Glimmerglass, comes from James Fenimore Cooper's Leatherstocking Tales, describing the lake as a glimmerglass. Leatherstocking Tales was a set of 5 novels describing life in 18th century colonial New York. Glimmerglass State Park is a beach, picnic, camping, and covered bridge. Hyde Hall is the mansion inside the park, a state historic site, constructed by George Hyde Clark, who lived in the late 18th, early 19th century, an Englishman whose great-grandfather and namesake was prominent as a colonial governor of New York. Betty and Wilbur Davis State Park, 223 acres, acquired by the state in 2001, is the 164th state park. 2 ponds, hiking, camping, and a forest. Betty and Wilbur Davis State Park was owned by Betty and Wilbur Davis and donated to the people of New York as a philanthropy. The last state park in the central region is the Erie Canal State Historic Park, a linear park that's 1,191 acres within the Madison, Oneida, and Onondaga counties, running on a 36-mile long level section of the original canal. Long level is the part of the canal that did not have any locks for 36 miles. Designated as a National Historic Trail by the National Park Service, it's part of the Empire State Trail. Much of it is not navigable by boat, so you'll see a few basins here and there, but the modern Erie Canal now runs just to the north of the original Erie Canal of 1825. The canal was enlarged 2 more times after that. So you can see here the Erie Canal running from Buffalo to Albany through the cities of Rochester, Syracuse, and Rome. See, it was expanded in 1862 and again in 1918. So along this park, there's also historical signs talking about the docks and the boat yards along the Erie Canal State Historic Park. The Erie Canal certainly made New York prosperous and wealthy and populated, bring a lot of Italian immigrants to the north, which is why you have places like Utica and Rome. And the park connects to Green Lake State Park, as well as municipal and county parks along the way. So many books have been written about the Erie Canal, songs written about it, and a documentary by ABC News host David Muir. Kind of looks a bit stone-faced, David Muir, but yeah, you could find him on the evening news, as well as telling the story of the Erie Canal. The next episode in this centennial series will be the Thousand Islands region, which has state parks accessible only by boat, including one with a lighthouse, as well as state parks on the Canadian border and along the northern reaches of Lake Champlain. Places also relating to the War of 1812, hydroelectric power, and the preservation of nature, as well as campsites. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I look forward to the next episode, Thousand Islands, followed by Finger Lakes, Genesee, Niagara, and Allegheny. Thank you very much.